For most of human history, the voices of the most powerful people in the world vanished the moment they spoke. But the late 19th century changed everything. Today, we are diving into the rare vaults of American history. We are going back to the invention of the phonograph to play the actual recorded words of U.S. presidents. Voices you've almost certainly never heard. From Benjamin Harrison to Calvin Coolidge. Get ready for a goosebump-inducing journey through sight and sound.
In vain after these things may we indulge the fond hope of peace and reconciliation.
Before the 1890s, presidency was experienced through printed word and pictures. But with the invention of Edison's phonograph, a new era began, the age of auto-recorded history. Suddenly, a president's words could be captured and played back for future generations. The earliest recordings are rough, often scratchy, but they are direct portals to the past. They let us hear the true cadence, accent, and style of speaking from an era long gone. Our journey begins with Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd President of the United States. While he was alive for the phonograph invention, actual public records of him speaking are incredibly rare. This is partly because Harrison was generally considered to be a poor speaker. He was reserved, formal, and lacked the charisma that electrified crowds. His speeches were often intellectual, but delivered in a rather monotone style. Hidden fact: Harrison was the last president to have a full beard, giving him a distinguished Victorian look. However, he rarely interacted directly with the public, preferring written statements. His recorded words often came from recordings for posterity rather than broad public consumption. We are lucky enough to have a brief historic clip of his voice captured on a rare cylinder. Listen closely, as this voice few people alive today have ever heard. Be warned, it's very scratchy. This is the only known recording of President Benjamin Harrison, thought to be made after his presidency, sometime between 1894 and 1899. This modern recording featured a narration explaining how Harrison's voice was recorded and features the 1814 campaign song of Harrison's grandfather, Old Tippecanoe, President William Henry Harrison, which was resurrected for Benjamin's 1888 campaign. The Library of Congress says only one copy of the recording has been found and is located at the Benjamin Harrison Memorial Home, and this recording was made from that recording.
Has caused this great commotion, motion, our country flew. It is the fall a-rolling on, for Tippecanoe and Martin too, for Tippecanoe and Martin too, and with them will be Stephen Grove.
1888. The successful campaign song of 1840 is reintroduced by the Republican Party. It is a fitting tribute, for the GOP candidate is Benjamin Harrison, grandson of old Tippecanoe William Henry Harrison.
A rousing cheer, we beat heathen Rome.
In a rare recording, this was the voice of Benjamin Harrison. His speech begins, "As President of the United States, I was present at the first Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C.
As President of the United States, I was present at the first Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C.
I fully believe that with God's help, our two countries shall continue to live side by side in peace and prosperity." Benjamin Harrison.
Believe that with God's help, our two countries shall continue to live side by side in peace and prosperity. Benjamin Harrison.
The Democratic choice is incumbent Grover Cleveland, first Democratic president since the Civil War. The nation endorses Cleveland, but a majority of electoral votes go to Harrison.
Next is the 25th President, William McKinley. Unlike Harrison, McKinley was a gifted public speaker. He was known for his polite manner, clear articulation, and emotional delivery. His speeches were popular at the time when political rallies were a major form of entertainment. He was especially good at connecting with the people, earning him great admiration. President McKinley's last speech was given on September 5th, 1901, at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. McKinley was assassinated the very next day. The speech promoted international cooperation and reciprocal trade agreements, arguing that the era of the exclusiveness was over and the Americans' strength lies in peace and non-conflict. He emphasized building strong relationships with other nations for mutual benefit, envisioning greater trade, respect, and lasting friendships. Now, let's listen to the clear, professional tone of William McKinley, a voice that guided America into a new century.
My fellow citizens, trade statistics indicate that this country is in a state of unexampled prosperity. The figures show that we are furnishing profitable employment to the millions of working men throughout the United States. Our capacity to produce has developed so enormously, and our products have so multiplied, that the problem of more markets requires our urgent and immediate attention. By sensible trade arrangements, which will not interrupt our home production, we shall extend the outlet for our increasing surplus. What we produce beyond our domestic consumption must have vent abroad. Reciprocity treaties are in harmony with the spirit of the time. The expansion of our trade and commerce is the pressing problem. Next in advantage to having the thing to sell is to have the convenience to carry it to the buyer. We must encourage our merchant marine. We must have more ships. They must be under the American flag, built, manned, and owned by Americans. These will not only be profitable in a commercial sense, they will be messengers of peace wherever they go. We must build the Isthmian Canal, which will unite the two oceans. The construction of a Pacific cable cannot be longer postponed. In the furtherance of these objects of national interest and concern, you are performing an important part. The good work will go on. It cannot be stopped. These buildings will disappear. This creation of art and beauty and industry will perish from sight. But who can tell the new thoughts that have been awakened? the ambition fired, and the high achievements that will be wrought through this exposition. Gentlemen, let us ever remember that our interest is in concord, not conflict, and that our real eminence rests in the victories of peace, not those of war.
Now we get to the voice of pure energy, Theodore Roosevelt. The 26th president was a revolutionary speaker. He was known for his vigorous, high-pitched delivery, often shouting key phrases like bully and using animated gestures. His speeches were events, and his voice was immediately recognizable. Fun fact, Roosevelt was the first president whose voice was widely recorded and distributed. He loved the new technology, seeing it as a powerful way to communicate directly with the American people, bypassing the newspapers. Because of this, recordings of Teddy Roosevelt are much easier to find than his predecessors. It was hard to pick which speech to present to you, and the clips I will be showing you are from various speeches. Do prepare yourself for a burst of historical energy as we hear Theodore Roosevelt.
The difference between Mr. Wilson and myself is fundamental. The other day, in a speech at Sioux Falls, Mr. Wilson stated his position when he said that the history of government, the history of liberty, was the history of the limitation of governmental power. This is true as an academic statement of history in the past. It is not true as a statement affecting the present. It is true of the history of medieval Europe. It is not true of the history of 20th century America. In the days when all governmental power existed exclusively in the king or in the baronage, and when the people had no shred of that power in their own hands, then it undoubtedly was true that the history of liberty was the history of the limitation of the governmental power of the outsiders who possessed that power. But today the people have actually or potentially the entire governmental power. It is theirs to use and to exercise if they choose to use and to exercise it. It offers the only adequate instrument with which they can work for the betterment, for the uplifting of the masses of our people.
The 27th president, William Howard Taft, followed TR, but his speaking style was entirely different. Taft was considered a practical but not stirring speaker. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and articulated, but his voice was deep, and his delivery often slower and more academic than Roosevelt's dramatic style. Taft's speeches tended to be long, focusing heavily on legal and governmental policy. Hidden fact: Taft was the last president to forego the use of speechwriters entirely, composing all his own major addresses. His voice therefore gives us a very authentic listen to the man himself. Let's listen to the thoughtful, weighty delivery of William Howard Taft in this recording of a campaign speech during the presidential election of 1912, stressing Republican prosperity. At the time, he was running against Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt. Wilson won the election that year.
Before all reform, before all changes, before every other consideration and importance, is the furnishing to the people the means of living, the means of enjoying comfort in their lives, and of educating their children, of making their homes attractive. And all this depends upon the high rate of wages, the great demand for labor, and the continuance of prosperity and good business. How foolish the American people would be to hazard the continuance of this by voting into a power, a party whose first declared principle is hostility to the policy of protection upon which our business is conducted. Under a Republican administration, there's nothing to fear from the policy of Congress in respect to the tariff or any other economic policy which will disturb business or frighten capital. With the incoming of a Democratic administration, and if it comes in, it's difficult to see how it can come in without absolute control of both houses of Congress. I ask the business interests of this country, I ask the wage earners, whether when they receive the news the day after the election that there's to be absolutely democratic control of the financial and economic problems of this country after the 4th of March, whether even mere doubt as to what the Democratic Party would do with this power in respect to the tariff would not halt and paralyze business.
The 28th president, Woodrow Wilson, was an academic, a former university president, and it shows in his rhetoric. Wilson was a masterful speaker, known for his clarity, elegance, and intellect. He was also the first president to regularly deliver the State of the Union address to Congress in person since John Adams, reintroducing a tradition that changed presidential communication forever. Fun fact: though radio was still developing, Wilson's speeches were often widely covered, and his voice was seen as sophisticated and convincing, especially when discussing foreign policy matters like World War I. Here is the distinct academic voice of Woodrow Wilson as he gives a campaign speech on tariff and the regulation of trust.
We stand in the presence of an awakened nation. Plainly, it is a new age. There are two great things to do. One is to set up the rule of justice and right in such matters as the tariff, the regulation of trusts, and the prevention of monopoly. The business of government is to separate special and particular interests from the general interests of wide communities. The initial task this year is to get our government in such shape that we can use it for our own purpose, not against anybody in particular, but for everybody in general. We want to establish a real partnership between all the people and the federal government, instead of between special interests and the federal government. We must effect a great readjustment and get the forces of the whole people once more into play. The tariff question as dealt with in our time has not been business, it has been politics. The tariff has become a system of favors. Tariff schedules have been determined in committee rooms and in conferences. The tariff becomes a matter of legitimate business only when the understanding it represents is between the leaders of Congress and the whole people of the United States, instead of between the leaders of Congress and small groups of manufacturers demanding special recognition and consideration. That is the heart of the whole affair. It is at bottom a question of good faith and morals.
Our next voice belongs to the 29th President, Warren G. Harding. He was a newspaper editor by trade and had a rich, classic radio voice. He was considered an excellent speaker, perhaps the most naturally talented speaker of his time. Harding was the first sitting president to have his voice transmitted over the radio, marking a major shift in mass communication. This gave him direct, unedited access to millions of households. His recordings are rare, primarily because his presidency was tragically cut short by his death in office. In this 1920 campaign speech called Liberty Under the Law, Harding speaks about the perceived threat of communism and socialist idealism following the 1917 Russian Revolution. He argued that America needed to focus on its own domestic affairs and stabilize its capitalist system rather than risk a similar fate by embracing revolutionary political experiments.
To that saving constitutionalism which contemplates all America as one people and holds just government free from influence on the one hand and unmoved by intimidation on the other. It would be the blindness of folly to ignore the activities in our own country which are aimed to destroy our economic system and to commit us to the colossal tragedy which has both destroyed all freedom and made Russia impotent. This movement is not to be halted in throttled liberties. We must not abridge the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, or the freedom of assembly, because there is no promise in repression. These liberties are as sacred as the freedom of religious belief, as inviolable as the rights of life and the pursuit of happiness.
Our last speech is a real treat. The first president to be featured in a sound film was Calvin Coolidge, and we have that clip to show you. When Harding died, Calvin Coolidge took over. Silent Cal, as he was called, was famous for being a man of few words. However, when he did speak, especially over the radio, he was effective. His voice was higher pitched and delivered in a distinct New England accent, often in a monotone. Despite his reputation for silence, Coolidge gave regular radio addresses that became hugely popular, allowing him to bypass the press. Fun fact, not only was he the first president to be in a sound film, Coolidge was also the first president to use radio, not just to transmit speeches, but to hold regular public question and answer sessions, connecting with the American people in a new way. In this partial sound film clip called President Coolidge Taken on the White House Grounds was filmed in 1924. His speech is on taxation and government.
The country needs every ounce of its energy to restore itself. The costs of government are all assessed upon the people. This means that the farmer is doomed to provide a certain amount of money out of the sale of his produce, no matter how low the price, to pay his taxes. The manufacturer, the professional man, the clerk must do the same from their income. The wage earner, often at a higher rate when compared with his earning, makes his contribution, perhaps not directly, but indirectly, in the advanced cost of everything he buys. The expenses of the government reach everybody. Taxes take from everyone a part of his earnings and force everyone to work for a certain part of his time for the government. When we come to realize that the yearly expenses of the governments of this country, the stupendous sum of about $7.5 billion, we get $700 million is needed by the national government and the remainder by local governments. Such a sum is difficult to comprehend. It represents all the pay of 5 million wage earners receiving $5 a day, working 300 days in the year. If the government should add $100 million of expense, it would represent 4 days more work of these wage earners. These are some of the reasons why I want to cut down public expense. I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the rewards of their own industry. This is the chief meaning of freedom. Until we can reestablish a condition under which the earnings of the people can be kept by the people, we are bound to suffer a very severe and distinct curtailment of our liberty.
Hearing the actual voices of these early presidents, from the barely audible cylinder of Benjamin Harrison to the sound film clip of Coolidge, is truly a profound experience. It allows us to not just read history, but to hear it. Let us know which voice surprised you the most in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the archival records. Thank you for joining us today. We invite you to watch all our videos, from famous funerals to diving into the archives, to find generations of history.